As you saw today, House Republicans released their investigation report into Afghanistan withdrawal. This comes, of course, 2 years after their first report, and this one says little or nothing new. We've already issued comment about the one-sided partisan nature of this report, so I'm not going to belabor that right now, but I do think a brief rundown of actual facts is important. First, on the very day this administration took office, the Taliban was in the strongest position it had been in years, and the Afghan government the weakest. The Trump administration cut a deal called the Doha Agreement that mandated a complete U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and yes, that included Bagram Air Base, by the end of May 2021. That deal also released 5,000 Taliban fighters from prison. 5,000 fighters. In return, the Taliban agreed not to attack U.S. troops, which is a good thing because the former president reduced our presence in Afghanistan from about 14,000 down to 2,500. As General Frank McKenzie, former commander of U.S. Central Command, said himself in testimony, the Doha deal had a, quote, really pernicious effect, unquote, on the Afghan government and military. As we saw, it demoralized them and it disenfranchised them. They knew right then and there that America was on its way out. Indeed, in October of 2020, then President Trump ordered his military to rush the exit from Afghanistan and have everybody leave by Christmas of that year. President Biden, for his part, faced a stark choice when he came to office. Abide by the flawed agreement and end America's longest war, or blow up the deal, extend the war, and see a much smaller contingent of American troops back in combat with the Taliban. He chose the former, and he was able to buy additional time to prepare for that withdrawal all the way into the summer. And we as a nation are safer for it. Any and every discussion about what happened in Afghanistan has to start right there. Sadly, the report does not dwell on it. Now, there's some other falsehoods, too many to mention, but a few do stand out, and I'd like to tick them off if you don't mind. 1, there was, in fact, planning for evacuations, planning that started in the spring of 2021 and included all the requisite agencies. In fact, the Department of Defense pre-positioned military units in the region so that once a decision had been reached to evacuate, they would be poised to respond in a timely fashion. 2, there was no fine-tuned assessment of how fast things would unfold in August of 2021. It all moved a lot faster than anyone anticipated. As the Taliban moved in, Afghan forces stopped fighting, and the Ghani government fled. As then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley said, quote, nothing that I saw indicated a collapse of this army and this government in 11 days, end quote. 3, there was no point in securing Bagram Air Base for use during the evacuation. Doing so would not only have required thousands of additional U.S. troops, but also would have required a dangerous trek by evacuees over Taliban-controlled territory, making the evacuation even more difficult to execute than it already was. 4, there was no handover of U.S. equipment to the Taliban. That equipment had been provided to Afghan security forces appropriately and with congressional approval over the course of 2 decades of war. That equipment was left by those Afghan forces when they surrendered or stopped fighting. And 5, there was no deception, lying, or lack of transparency by this administration, either during or after the withdrawal. We did the best we could every day to keep the American people informed of what was happening. We conducted our own after-action reports and shared those too with the public. And as I mentioned, we cooperated extensively in this investigation and we continue to work with the War Commission. Ending wars is more difficult than starting them. President Biden knew that. He acknowledged that. But it doesn't mean that the decision to end this one was wrong or that the withdrawal wasn't conducted as professionally and as bravely as was humanly possible given the circumstances. It doesn't mean we don't grieve and mourn with the families of those whose lives were tragically taken during the withdrawal, especially at Abbey Gate on the 26th of August of that year. And it doesn't mean that we don't still look with awe and admiration at the many thousands of men and women who waged this war over the course of 20 years. Troops, diplomats, intelligence experts, contractors, and civilian employees from this and dozens of other nations. They accomplished the mission for which they were sent to Afghanistan. They helped make us a safer nation. Sadly, 2,461 of them did not make it home. And many of those who did still struggle with the wounds of war, seen and unseen. As the President has said, we owe them and their families a debt of gratitude that can never be fully repaid. But now that the war is over, our nation can better focus on other pressing national security interests around the world. We would do